I will just take very few more minutes in order to describe a very peculiar, very specific type of investment that is not so big in our region, but that is very popular in other areas of this country, which is the off-plan property investment. I'm sure most of you know what an off-plan investment is all about. Is when you're actually purchasing a property that does not exist but is going to be built in the future. This is obviously the kind of investment that requests the most attentions coming from a buyer, simply because the property does not exist and hopefully, will be built in the future time after the signature of the preliminary contract. There is a specific legislation concerning this topic, which is the Legislative Decree 122/2005, that is very well known by buyers who actually experience this type of investment. This is a legislation which is specifically tailored and specifically aimed to give protection to buyers of off-plan construction. What is the essence of this legislation? The Italian legislator provides for off-plan buyers for the release of a bank guarantee. This is going to protect the buyer in case of bankruptcy of the builder, of the vendor. Unfortunately, this is something quite recurrent. You might sign a preliminary contract, the vendor is committed to sell you a property that is going to be built, you have a case of bankruptcy, and you might run the risk to lose your deposit, that in some cases is rather substantial. I've seen many off-plan buyers who were requested to pay 50% deposit at the signature of the preliminary contract. So whenever you're considering to invest off-plan, you should really be extremely attentive, because it's a very sensitive kind of investment. The Italian legislation is very protective of off-plan buyers, and the preliminary contract has a number of essential elements that I will be happy to describe to you very briefly. So the first essential element I was mentioning is the bank guarantee. This is actually quite crucial, and according to the Italian legislature, such bank guarantees are supposed to be issued only by a very limited number of financial institutions. This is the most recurrent problem I've seen buyers experiencing. According to the Italian law, such bank guarantees should be released by a selected number of financial institutions listed and under control of Bank of Italy. Very often, unfortunately, the bank guarantees are not compliant with Italian legislation and only provide for a fake guarantee, because if the financial institution is not extremely solid and solvent, obviously you might have the impression to be protected, but this would actually not be the case. So I will just very quickly describe what are the elements of a preliminary contract for off-plan buyers. Full description of the buyers, identification of details of the property. This is important in any kind of preliminary contract, even more so in case of an off-plan construction. Technical data relating to the building, because in simple words, you want to know exactly what you will end up purchasing, because you do not have the possibility to go on site and see in practical terms the property you are actually purchasing. So this involves that the description of the property in the preliminary contract should be extremely analytic. Deadline for completion, this is another sensitive aspect. A lot of people buy, completion date is in 1 year, and they end up waiting 2, 3, 4 years or even more, because the construction company is facing difficulties, especially now out of recession and and credit crunch, details of the bank guarantee, method of payments, presence of mortgages if they are present, and in case of presence of contractors, they also need to be clearly mentioned and detailed in the preliminary contract. Lack of one of these elements might involve nullity of the preliminary contract, but we are talking a very specific kind of nullity. Since these elements are directed and aimed to give protection to the buyer, the only person who will be actually in the position to challenge the preliminary contract will be the buyer himself.